The moon hung low over the jagged cliffs of Arken Prime, casting pale light across the cavernous valley below. The air was thick with mist and the scent of ozone, a reminder that this planet's atmosphere had been manipulated by bioengineers long ago. Somewhere in the shadows of those cliffs, a scream echoed, thin and desperate, swallowed almost immediately by the rocky abyss. Lyra's heart raced as she struggled to free her bindings. The creatures that had captured her, the Gorrath monstrous beasts with chitinous hides and jagged claws, weren't meant to be fought by someone human, fragile and unarmed. Her captors had dragged her here for a reason. She was bait. The Alpha, a towering Gorrath with eyes like molten metal, had been watching, waiting for something or someone to fall into its trap. Lyra's mind raced. She wasn't a fighter. She was a researcher, studying the flora of Arken Prime. But as the cold iron cuffs bit into her wrists and the scent of predator filled her nostrils, survival instincts surged. The Alpha had torn through her companions earlier, and she knew the same fate awaited her. But she refused to die quietly. Somewhere above the cliffs, hidden in the jagged rocks, he was coming. Jace, a human who had arrived on Arken Prime only a week ago, had a reputation that preceded him among the scattered colonies. Reckless, fearless, and relentless. When he'd learned of the Gorratha's hunt, he didn't hesitate. He wasn't like the other humans who had evacuated in fear. Jace saw a chance to challenge fate, to stand against something monstrous. The Gorrath Alpha prowled closer, its claws scraping the stone like thunder. Lyra forced herself to remain still, though every fiber of her being screamed to run, to scream, to fight. But she had no weapons, only her intellect and the hope that someone would come. High above, Jace crouched on an overhang, his breathing steady. He observed the beast. Every inch of the Alpha radiated power. Muscle rippling under armored skin, claws sharp enough to pierce the hull of a shuttle, eyes that burned with instinctual intelligence. Most humans would flee, but Jace didn't. He carried only a plasma blade and a few experimental grenades, barely enough to make a dent. But he had something the Alpha didn't: cunning, adaptability, and sheer determination. Jace leapt. The wind tore at him as he descended, aiming for the blind spot in the creature's massive frame. The Alpha snarled, sensing his presence, and Lyra thought she would never see a human stand against such a monster. But then she watched as Jace landed with cat-like precision, plasma blade igniting with a hum that cut through the night. The Alpha lunged. Its jaws were wide enough to swallow a human whole, teeth glinting in the moonlight. Jace dodged, rolling under the crushing weight of the beast's forelimb. He slashed upward, cutting through armor plating, and the Alpha roared in anger and pain. Lyra's pulse surged. He could do this. Time seemed to slow. The Alpha's eyes fixed on Jace, calculating, aware of the threat. Jace feinted, drawing the beast toward a rocky ledge. He had noticed the instability of the cliffs during his approach. One wrong move from the Alpha, and it would tumble down into the jagged chasm below. Lyra struggled against her chains, her mind working furiously. She remembered a destabilizing chemical from her research, something the Gorratha's biology reacted violently to. If she could get close enough to spray it, she might weaken the Alpha just enough to give Jace an opening. Risking her life, she inched closer, ignoring the creature's sharp teeth snapping just inches away. Jace saw her move. With a quick gesture he yelled, "Now, Lyra!" She released the chemical, spraying it directly at the Alpha's exposed eyes. The creature shrieked, stumbling backward, momentarily blinded and enraged. Jace seized the moment, sprinting toward the Alpha with everything he had. He drove the plasma blade into the creature's chest, cutting through layered chitin and raw muscle. The Alpha thrashed violently, shaking the cliffside, sending rocks tumbling down into the valley below. Lyra ducked, holding her breath as the beast turned its full fury toward Jace. But he didn't falter. He dodged and struck again, precise and relentless. Every blow pushed the Alpha closer to the edge. With one final desperate move, Jace used all his weight and leverage, slashing at the Alpha's legs. The creature lost balance, teetering at the edge of the cliff. For a moment silence fell. The only sound was the wind and the distant hum of the planet's atmosphere. Then, with a deafening crash, the Alpha plunged into the chasm below. Dust and debris filled the air, and Lyra stumbled forward, shaking with relief. Jace turned to her, his armor scorched, blade flickering but still intact. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. Lyra's knees gave way as she fell into his arms. I thought it was over," she whispered. Her voice trembled, still caught between fear and awe. "It's not over yet," Jace said with a grin. "But we're alive." The Gorrath's minions scattered at the sight of their Alpha's defeat. Lyra and Jace moved quickly, using the shadows and rocky terrain to evade any remaining predators. The forest below offered temporary cover, and eventually, they found themselves at the edge of a human settlement, a cluster of domed habitats glowing faintly against the night. Inside, the other humans stared in astonishment. Lyra recounted the story, her voice steady now, telling of the Alpha, the chase, and the human who had defied nature itself. Jace, ever humble, simply shrugged. "It's what had to be done," he said. But for Lyra, it wasn't just bravery or skill. It was something more. Something human. Despite the advanced tech and the alien landscapes, despite the monsters that lurked in shadows, it was courage and compassion that had torn through the impossible and brought her back from death. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Scouts patrolled the surrounding valleys, wary of any other predators. Lyra worked with them to develop early warning systems, using her knowledge of the planet's flora to detect movement. Jace trained not for glory, but to ensure that if the Alpha's pack ever returned, they would be ready. One evening, as the twin moons rose over Arken Prime, Lyra and Jace sat on the edge of the cliffs, watching the valley below. The wind was cool, carrying with it the scent of alien blossoms and distant ozone. Lyra finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. "You were incredible," she said softly. Jace shrugged, leaning back on his hands. "I did what anyone would have if they had a chance to save someone." Lyra shook her head. "No, not anyone. Most would have run or failed. You tore through an Alpha with your bare will, with a single blade to save me." He smiled, a faint glimmer of pride and humility mixing on his face. "Maybe. But I didn't do it alone." She raised an eyebrow. "Alone? The moment you sprayed that chemical, you gave me the edge I needed. Without you, the Alpha would have torn me apart," he said. "You saved yourself too, in a way." Lyra laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in days. "I guess we saved each other then." The moons reflected off the distant cliffs, casting their silver glow over the landscape. For the first time since her capture, Lyra felt a sense of peace. The monsters had been defeated, not by technology alone, but by human ingenuity, courage, and the bond that had formed in the heat of survival. Weeks later, Lyra returned to her research, cataloging flora and tracking the unusual migratory patterns of Arken Prime's creatures. Jace continued his patrols, ever watchful, but always returning to check on her. They had become partners, not just in survival, but in understanding the strange, dangerous, and beautiful world they now called home. The Alpha's roar would never haunt her again. Instead, she carried with her the memory of a human who dared the impossible, who tore through fear and flesh alike to save a girl left for monsters. And in that memory she found hope, not just for survival, but for what humanity could achieve when it refused to yield to terror. As the twin moons set over the horizon, Lyra and Jace stood together at the cliff's edge, watching the first light of Arken Prime's sun spill across the valley. The monsters had been vanquished, but the world was still wild, still dangerous, still beautiful. And for the first time, Lyra felt ready to face it, because she was no longer alone.